I don't think I understand how much I love being a nerd. I've just always been obsessive about the things that I like. They say that's a cancer trait, by the way, that we become like experts when we like something. And I'm also like a collector. So it's like, if I like this thing, I can't just have this one thing. I need to get like the set, which is odd because I never got into Pokemon, but I think that's because it came out like right when I started realizing that men existed. And so then it was like, oh, I'll just collect men. That's another episode. Just a side note. It's true. Like, in my days, like, don't let 3 of y'all be fine in a crew. I'll spread it out over time, but collect them all. Shout out to Texas A&M. Our producer AJ is behind the camera like, oh my God. Oh my God. You know what? You have to understand, AJ, when I speak like this, like people are listening and they're like, oh my God, it's not just me. It's not just me. Because I know some of y'all was out there too. You were, for myriad of reasons. Maybe your daddy wasn't around and so you were seeking connectivity and looking for love in all the wrong places. Or maybe your dad was around and you were looking for love in all the wrong places. Nonetheless. Or maybe there was just a lot of fine around. And you were like, collect them all. First question. Are you planning on naming more pets after Star Wars characters? Oh my God, what are you guys talking about? You guys know me so well. Okay, so let's get into black nerddom. So I have 5 pets. That's a whole other conversation. I have 5 pets. All of them are named for black sci-fi characters. Yes. I wouldn't say that I'm a sci-fi fanatic because I feel like that's a very specific genre that you have to be like really into. Like I wasn't watching like the Science Fiction Network. I wasn't there when it was changed from the Science Fiction Network to sci-fi. But did I watch The Expanse? Yes, I did. And I feel like if you watch The Expanse and that's taking you from like, oh, I like Star Wars to I like sci-fi. So I do think that did expand my sci-fi sensibilities. Did I really love Starship Troopers when I was a younger person? No, because Starship Troopers wasn't really sci-fi. It was really like fi. Okay, it was literally like, why are they doing this? But did I like Stargate? Yes. Do I still believe that there are Stargates? Perhaps. I think maybe there were. And then eventually, like, the aliens were like, we got to cut it off because they acting up down there. We can't let them come back. So now it's like a one-way, right? It's like a one-way. I say all that to say that, so some of my animals are named after Star Trek characters. And that's literally like the one thing that my father and I have connected on, like in this lifetime, Star Trek. My dad used to like religiously watch Star Trek: The Next Generation. And so I grew up with Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the Starship Enterprise in my consciousness. And space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. I'm hearing it in my head. To seek out new life and new civilization. To boldly go where no one has gone before. Like that was like a really like that was the one thing we connected on. So I have animals that are named after Star Trek characters. Now, Geordi is named after Geordi LaForge, who was played by, of course, Kunta Kinte, a.k.a. Reading Rainbow, a.k.a. LeVar Burton. Now, I'm going to take it a step further. His character on Star Trek had a vision impairment, which is why he was wearing a banana clip visor, okay? Geordi, my dog, has one eye. So they share not just a name, but they share a vision disability. So Geordi is named Geordi LaFur for Geordi LaForge. Keeping up with the Star Trek of it all, we have Huri, who is named after Lieutenant Nyota Uhura of the Starship Enterprise. Okay, rest in peace to Nichelle Nichols. She was a Black woman who played the role of Lieutenant Uhura on the first Star Trek with Captain James T. Kirk. And she actually didn't even want to take the role. And apparently, like, word got to Martin Luther King that she didn't want to take the role or she didn't want to stay on the show. And he like pulled her to the side and pulled her coat and was like, sis, like, we need you in these spaces. We need to see you in the future. We need to see Black folk in the future. And this is a role also where you are in representation in a space where folks aren't expecting Black people to show up. And so we need you there. You're actually doing something radical and revolutionary by just being on the show. And so she stayed on the show. So my cat Huri is named for Lieutenant Nyota Uhura. Then we have my Star Wars characters. Star Wars is... I don't even know how Star Wars came into my life, but I don't know a life without it. I just love Star Wars. And I think for nerds too, especially Black nerds, like there's something like secondary, like as Black people, we have our own culture. And then nerddom allows us to have like an additional culture, like in abundance of culture. And then just the way that we do culture when we come into nerddom is its own thing too, right? Like when you see Comic-Con, like you'll see people dress up as characters, and then you'll see Black people dress up as characters. And then we be adding swag to stuff, like we be doing our own thing. Do I have to remind y'all about when Wakanda Forever and Black Panther came out? We couldn't just go to the movie. We couldn't. We had to do it all the way up. And you know your girl did, okay? You know your girl did. But I have 3 animals named after Star Wars characters. Of course, the original OG himself, Lando Calrissian, who is named for Lando Calrissian, played by Billy D. Williams. He was the mayor of Cloud City. Also ratted out Han Solo. But then he came back, you know what I'm saying, and got everything on track. And, they got rid of Jabba the Hutt, et cetera. So we said, okay, he was also like, just the finest man in the galaxy. And that's really what it is. Colt 45 every time. Then we have my 2 kittens. Now, I know you're like, well, how you got so many animals? Because my ex brought home 2 kittens and then we broke up a month later. So you know what? I'm here with the 2 kittens. They're actually very lovely. Their names are Jedi and Mando, not to be confused with Lando. I'm sure it confuses both of them. However, Mando is from Mandalorian because when he was a kitten, he had a big old head that looked like a helmet. And Jedi is, we got to show love to the Jedi. We are in a time right now where we have to be Jedi Knights in how we are maneuvering. So she keeps us on our toes in this house because she is a Jedi Knight, just in how she maneuvers. So those are my animals, and that's my Black nerddom answer to that. Next question. How do you think the perception of blurs has changed over time? I think I said this like a little bit in the intro, but I think it's changed over time because at one point in time, it was almost as if people looked at nerds, or blurs, I should say, as like not really being Black, right? It was like, oh, y'all ain't black, like y'all are over there. Whereas I know for people like me, like that felt really offensive. It felt like, why do I have to transfer my Blackness in order to enjoy this space of like creativity and artistry? And as we've gotten to see like more Black characters be introduced in these spaces and be heralded, like I think it's given people a lot more license. But at one point in time, I think that's where some of that ostracizing feeling came from. It was like, oh, so you into that and you're not into this, then that means you're not Black. It's the same way that like they'll tell little boys like, oh, if you're into dance, but you're not into football, then you're not a boy. And it's like, no, like I'm still a boy, but I'm over here doing a tour jeté versus a touchdown. Like, what's the problem? And as a comic, I started to see that same element, right? Where it was like, if you were a comic and you're talking about kind of like nerdy things, people would be like, oh, you're not a Black comic. You're just a comic that happens to be Black kind of vibe. That's literally why I created Smart Funny in Black. Originally, Smart Funny in Black was a showcase. It was an actual like just stand-up show. And it was a stand-up show for comics that I felt like were just basically not getting their just due as stand-ups, as Black stand-ups, because they weren't talking about like your typical Black topics in the typical Black comedic way, like Comic View or Def Comedy Jam. And so I said, no, I'm going to start a show called Smart Funny in Black. And it really is going to be comics who just are expanding what is considered Black comedy. And it ends up being Black nerds all the time. Are you enjoying this episode? Well, all my blurs, I need you to head on over to Patreon and get the rest of it. Aloha Mora. That's me opening Patreon for y'all.